38 minutes after the hour now, President Trump is angry over Defense Secretary Jim Mattis's resignation letter. A source close to the White House tells CNN that the president, quote, hates the letter, but hates the coverage more. He's upset that Mattis was often called one of the adults in the room. Now, General Mattis's abrupt resignation stunned U.S. allies, took all of Washington by surprise. And it came right after the president's announcement to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Let's talk about all of this. Here with me now, Rebecca Grant. She is a national security and military analyst and the president of the IRIS Independent Research, and Rear Admiral John Kirby, CNN military and diplomatic analyst. Welcome back, both of you. And let me start here with you, Admiral Kirby. The Guardian and the Washington Post are reporting, and this gets to both the Syria decision and General Mattis, that it was that call with Turkish President Erdogan a Friday ago, so a week ago yesterday, in which there was the exchange that Erdogan said, I don't know why you still have U.S. troops in Syria. You say you've won. Why are you backing the Kurds there in Syria? And the president said, you're right, it's yours, I'm getting out. How does that correspond with the letter that General Mattis submitted with his resignation, talking about the strategic competitors and malign actors?
Yeah, it shows what the real dissonance was between Trump and Mattis with respect to what we were doing in Syria, and more broadly, Victor, on the power resident in alliances and partnerships. It also shows some of the schizophrenia of Turkey over this whole issue. I mean, they have bristled at the support we've been giving to Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish fighters, because they view most of those Kurdish fighters as terrorist groups. On the other hand, they've kind of quietly welcomed American presence there in northeastern Syria because it has tended to keep Russia and the Assad regime and, quite frankly, ISIS fighters away from their border, although they're not that worried about ISIS. So they're suffering a little bit of paranoia on this as well.
So, Rebecca, from your perspective, I read in your conversations with my producers is that you don't believe some of the concerns, or you don't agree with some of the concerns that both Democrats and Republicans have expressed about the president's decision to pull out the U.S. troops there of Syria.
Well, the first point I'd like to make is that a lot is staying in the region. We'll have air power in Jordan and Qatar in the UAE. We have Navy forces. Special ops are ready to engage at any moment. There are 1,000 French forces still on the ground. So we still have a commitment there and the ability to come back and bring in firepower whenever we need to. And I think finally the Admiral is right, and Turkey just couldn't take it anymore. And Trump has to consider that our Mideast policy really rests on Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia. Not a happy trio, but there we have it.
Rebecca, listen here to this interview. Wolf Blitzer spoke with Stephen Miller, senior advisor to the president, and how he frames the U.S.'s involvement in Syria and the enemies there that the U.S. was fighting. Watch and listen.
Let's defend our national security. Let's put America first, but let's not spill American blood to fight the enemies of other countries, as is the case in Syria.
The enemies of other countries there in Syria. Do you think that's the appropriate framework for the work that the U.S. military has been doing in Syria?
Well, the U.S. military is working with our coalition. The Defeat ISIS coalition consists of almost 70 countries and NATO and other groups. So I don't really agree with that, and I think we put a lot into it. And don't forget, the reason that we had to extend operations up into Syria was to retake Iraq. That's been accomplished. We still have 5,000 American forces in Iraq. And the Mattis strategy of surge last year in Syria has worked. Right now we're down to about 2,000 ISIS fighters. They control less than 1% of the territory, according to the coalition's report of December 4th. So Mattis did achieve a lot with his policy in Syria.
Admiral, has the U.S. been fighting other countries' enemies in Syria?
No, I mean, in fact, the idea that Stephen Miller puts is ridiculous. Russia, Iran, Turkey, Assad have never really been all that serious about fighting ISIS or either or al-Qaeda derivatives inside Syria. Their focus has largely been on propping up the Assad regime so that they can have, particularly Russia and Iran, can continue to use Syria for their own national interests. Russia wants a foothold in the Middle East. It's been their only foothold for decades. Iran wants a throughway to support Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they're not interested in fighting ISIS. We've not been fighting other people's enemies. ISIS is a global enemy. And as was pointed out, the coalition is now 74 nations strong. It's an international effort. effort. So it's very much on behalf of our own national security interests and the interests of so many other countries around the world with which we partner.
All right, Admiral Kirby, Rebecca Grant, thank you both.
Thank you.
Secretary